What a great way to spread color, huh? Hi, I'm Donna from The Masquerade, and we're going to work on putting these Dream Big panels together into one queen size quilt. So the first step is to take your 3 panels and square them off. I have my Hoffman panel, and when it comes on the bolt, it comes already folded in the middle for you. And the way they've been cut apart off the bolt sometimes varies as well. But not only that, the panel itself, when it's been printed on the fabric, is not always printed square. Sometimes it's bowed out at the corners. So the first thing you want to do is take your printed panel on the fold that it came with off the bolt, because that's pretty center, as center as you're going to get it. And you want to line up your ruler so that you've got one side on a line and then the other side as close to the edge straight as you possibly can. Now I've already trimmed mine, so I'm not going to trim it again. But then you trim off any white that's on either end of this piece, because both sides will have a little bit white on them. And then you're going to also trim the salvages off. And when that's all done, you want to make sure your panel is square, and it's not going to be. They never are. So you want to fold it on the diagonal. So once you've folded it on the diagonal, and you're going from one point to the square edge, you're going to be able to trim off any extra to make sure that your panel is square. And it has to also meet up at the other point perfectly. Now on this one, you can see I'm off, so I'm going to trim that a little bit more to make sure. And when you get all 3 of your panels trimmed and square, put them together and make sure that they're within 1/8 of an inch of each other. Now to make sure that this is going to be perfect, I can see that I've got to come off of here by, about 1/8 of an inch. But I want to make sure that I'm square to this edge here. So I'm going to line up a line, and I'm going to trim off about 1/8 of an inch along that line until I get to that point, and then I know my panel is perfectly square. And here I can just follow the part that I've already cut, and it's going perfectly right along the edge. You can always turn it over to the other side and cut from the square side, but then I wouldn't have seen how much had to come off, so I chose to do it that way. So now my panel is perfectly square because it goes from point to point and it meets at the corner in a perfect square. And after you've squared your blocks, you got to press out the seam in the middle and give it some spray starch. I'm using Best Press because it helps when you cut them on the diagonal. It helps keep them nice and firm so they don't stretch as easily. So you lay one of your Dream Big blocks aside, and then you take your other 2 and you're going to fold them in half on the diagonal, and then you're going to make your cut right along that diagonal. And I'm just going to use a pair of scissors because I want to stay right in that crease. So let me turn this. I mean, you can use a ruler and then just chop off a 1/16 of an inch, but I'm going to do it this way. I'm just going to insert my scissors. These are going to end up, these diagonals end up being the side that you stitch, so you're going to lose any jaggedness right in the seam allowance. There's those 2 halves. They end up going on opposite sides of the big panel. And what you want to do is find the center of your big panel and find the center of your half a panel, your diagonal piece, your wedge, and that's where they're going to be sewn together. So here's my square panel, and here's my wedge. And they're going to go right sides together. Now I've made a nice little mark there, a nice little fold. And there's one here too. So I'm going to match those marks up. And you'll see that your point is going to hang over. That's okay. You're going to end up trimming it off afterwards. So I'm going to pin these in place and sew them on opposite sides of the center square. You want to make sure while you're sewing this that you don't stretch it or pull it. Let the feed dogs do the work, because this is a whole very long bias seam and you don't want it stretching out of shape. Just want to make sure you're lined up and let the machine pull it through. You could use a walking foot, is probably the best way to do this too. And then we put the one on the opposite side, and we're going to trim the corners off and then put the last two on. And when you're done with the first two seams, you're going to want to press these open. So once you get those first two sides put on your big square, it's time to cut off the triangles. So I just use my big ruler and I line it up with the center square. And I also can line it up the seam along a seam line. So I have 2 points of reference there. And I can trim off that triangle. And I'll do that on all 4 sides. And that's that. So now I'm going to take the other 2 and they're going to go across this last side on opposite sides. Now if you don't want to mark it with a pin, you can always just give it a good finger press. Use your fingernail and give yourself a crease. That will show when you go to line them up. Okay, so I put my first 2 corners on, and I pressed open my seam. And now it's time to line up the last one. So here we are. I have the center of my middle, the center of my middle square. And I'm going to take one of my last wedges and I'm going to line it up so that the centers match, and pin or clip. If you're a clip person, that's okay too. And you don't want to stretch this. You want it to lay nice and flat. You just want it to lay along that side. And you want to do the same thing on the opposite side with the last wedge. There we go. We can take it to the machine and sew it, and our quilt top will be done. When you're done sewing the last 2 corners on, you have just these little dog ears to trim off. So all I do is match up my my straight side with my ruler and just trim these things off. So there it is. It's pretty big. It measures 70 inches square, and you could for sure find a color that's in this and put another border around it if you wanted to make it any bigger. So that's a whole cloth quilt that's ready to have fun with. Free motion quilting or ruler work, whatever you want to do. It's very popular right now, this Dream Big panel. So I hope this encourages you to make your own queen dream. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to quilt it.